Morning prayer for the home. Before the house fully awakens, when the light is still tender and the air holds yesterday's quiet, let your breath arrive where your body lives. Inhale slowly through the nose, letting the belly rise. Exhale even more slowly, letting the shoulders soften and the jaw unclench. This is not performance, this is permission. As your breath lengthens, your heart rate follows. The mind begins to unclutter, and the room quietly agrees to be a sanctuary. The morning does not need you to sprint. It needs you to arrive. I know the pace that waits for you, messages blinking, dishes whispering, responsibilities queuing up at the door of your mind. Some nights you sleep but never truly rest. Some mornings you stand up but still carry yesterday's weight across your chest. You love your people, yet the very love that fills your home can sometimes feel like 1,000 open tabs in your heart. You are not weak for feeling this. You are not late to grace. You are a soul with a body, and your nervous system has learned to brace for impact. Today we gently teach it to bow, not to panic. At the threshold stands a quiet figure, not demanding, not dramatic, steadfast as good wood. St. Joseph waits without hurry, the guardian who knows how to hold a home together from the inside out. He speaks first with presence, not with words. His silence is not absence, but attention. Imagine his hand resting lightly upon your doorway, the carpenter's palm that once steadied the little house of Nazareth. In this stillness, let a simple invocation rise, not forced, not rushed. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. Your breath is part of your prayer because your body is part of your story. As you breathe more slowly than you're used to, the body hears a message before the mind does. We are safe enough to listen. The brain, which has been taught by alarms and deadlines, begins to notice the longer exhale and unlearns the reflex to race. Awareness returns to small places, the weight of your feet on the floor, the temperature of the cup in your hands, the gentle thud of your heartbeat like a low drum calling everyone inside you to come home. This is practical spirituality, a body cooperating with grace, a nervous system becoming a servant of peace rather than the engine of panic. Bring your house into this prayer, not as an idea, but as a landscape of love. See the kitchen where coffee warms cold mornings, the hallway where shoes make small pilgrimages, the table that has tasted both celebration and silence. Let each room present its own intentions. The bedroom that longs for rest, the living room that holds conversations half-finished, the doorway that welcomes and sometimes worries. Your home is not merely walls and windows, it is the daily liturgy of your life. In the school of St. Joseph, we learn to trust in divine providence, not by escaping the ordinary, but by consecrating it. If you live with a spouse, a family, or with friends, hold them gently in your mind without trying to fix anything. If you live alone, know that solitude is not emptiness, but a chapel where God waits as faithfully as dawn. If your house carries the ache of grief, the confusion of conflict, or the weariness of waiting, do not hide it from this prayer. The Lord who moved quietly in Nazareth knows how to walk your hallways without breaking a single reed. You are seen. You are not alone. You do not need to pretend you are stronger than you feel to be welcomed here. Consider how Joseph worked. Measured, patient, precise. He faced the stubbornness of wood the way we face the stubbornness of our own hearts. No shouting, no shortcuts, just steady hands and a steady gaze. The morning, too, is a workshop. The Word of God is a carpenter's square, truing what is crooked. Repentance is the sandpaper that smooths what splinters us. Decision is the hammer that fixes the good in place. Habits are the nails that hold grace where it belongs. With St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer, and every small beginning holds the strength of a beam. Let your thoughts slow enough to name what the day will likely bring. This conversation, that deadline, a child's question, an unseen temptation, a simple joy. We will not promise heroics, we will practice fidelity. Simple consistency defeats sporadic intensity, and the heart shaped by small obediences carries peace further than grand vows can reach. Ask quietly for the grace to be faithful for the next hour, then the next and the next, one plank at a time laid upon providence. Now in this gentleness, whisper a welcome to the one who already stands within your walls. Lord Jesus, dwell in this home as you dwelt in Nazareth. Holy Mary, teach us your gaze. St. Joseph, keep watch at our door. Let your exhale be an act of surrender and your inhale an act of trust. If shame or fear tries to speak, let them pass like early mist burned away by a patient sun. You do not need to earn this presence. You need only to receive it as the poor receive bread, gratefully, completely, without negotiation. Before we move further, place your hand lightly over your heart, and with that warm weight, remind your body that it belongs to God. Offer what is fragile without apology. Offer what is strong without pride, and offer what is ordinary without boredom. The Lord delights to meet you exactly here, between the quiet hum of a refrigerator and the quiet ache of your hopes. Joseph's silence is an invitation to listen to the heart of God, and, in that listening, to become the kind of person whose very work, very words, and very rooms begin to breathe peace. The day often begins like a hallway of small alarms, each one tugging at attention, each one asking for a piece of you before you have located your center. There is the subtle race to be on time, the unspoken fear of being behind, the residue of yesterday's conversations echoing in the chest. In the body, this feels like a quiet tightening, shoulders that inch toward the ears, a breath that forgets its depth, a pulse that tap-taps at the base of the throat. The nervous system learns these mornings by heart and anticipates them, priming for speed even when the soul longs for stillness. In that gap between speed and stillness, many homes lose the first light of peace. Beware the hurry that steals your peace. The pain is real because hurry lives not only on the clock, but also in the story the body tells itself. The sympathetic system, built to protect, begins to act like the narrator of your day, scanning for danger in emails, texts, bills, and chores. Without naming it, you find yourself braced against the tone of a message, braced against a child's need, braced against your own expectations. The bracing becomes a habit, and the habit becomes a lens. Through that lens, even love looks heavy. Through that lens, prayer looks like one more task you might fail. There is another lens, quieter and sturdier, forged in the workshop of Nazareth. St. Joseph knew the nearness of God without noise. His silence did not push life away, it made room for it. In that silence, work did not compete with prayer. Work became prayer. This is where the home learns to breathe again. In the school of St. Joseph, trust is taught by presence, not by pressure. The presence of a man who guarded without fuss, who chose fidelity over spectacle, who let providence lead the way. When that presence stands at the threshold of a morning, the body hears a different story. Not, hurry up, but you are held. So many feel unworthy of quiet, as if interior peace must be earned with flawless schedules and perfect attitudes. Yet the heart is not a machine to be optimized. It is a sanctuary to be kept. Emotional neuroscience helps name what the saints lived by grace. States become traits. The state of bracing, repeated daily, becomes the trait of anxiety. The state of quiet receptivity, practiced gently, becomes the trait of peace. No scolding can make this shift. Only a kinder rhythm can. A rhythm where the exhale is honored, where attention lands softly on what is here rather than what might collapse later. In that rhythm, the home stops being a racetrack and becomes a chapel with rooms. Many carry a private ache that almost never speaks its name. The ache of feeling responsible for everyone's calm, while your own calm feels like a low flame about to go out. The ache of trying to do everything right and still sensing that something essential is missing. The ache of believing that God is near in theory, but distant in the kitchen, distant in the laundry, distant at the door. It is not failure to feel this ache. It is a sign of thirst, and thirst does not shame. Thirst invites. It invites a return to the well that does not run dry, the well where St. Joseph kept watch with a simple, steady gaze. When hurry becomes the master of the morning, the soul shrinks to fit the tempo. Relationships turn into logistics. Conversations flatten into checklists. Even prayer, when it appears, is rushed through like a form to be filed. The inner critic then arrives with its familiar verdict. Not enough, not spiritual enough, not organized enough, not strong enough. That verdict is a counterfeit. It sounds like zeal but tastes like despair. In contrast, the voice that guarded Nazareth is gentle enough to hold a child and strong enough to carry a family through night flights and uncertainties. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. This is not an emergency flare. It is a way of standing inside the day. Notice how certain mornings hold a small hidden kindness, a patch of light on the floor, the scent of coffee, the warmth of a mug between two hands, a remembered laugh. These are not distractions from holiness. They are its texture. The body registers them, and the nervous system loosens its grip, even if only a little. That little is not little. That little is the doorway. Through it, the home becomes more than tasks again. It becomes a little Nazareth, where the ordinary is wrapped in a quiet glory, where providence is trusted not as an abstract doctrine, but as the living backdrop of every step. The truth remains firm and compassionate at once. Frantic beginnings tend to script frantic days. Simple consistency tends to script peaceful ones. Not the consistency of perfection, but the consistency of presence. Presence to God. Presence to the people under your roof. Presence to your own heart without contempt. This is how, with St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer, ceases to be a phrase, and becomes a way of moving through rooms. Each room receives you. Each room is blessed by how you are in it. The kitchen tastes different when peace is invited to stand at the stove. For those who wake already tired, it can feel unfair to ask for anything more from the morning. Yet it is not more that heals. It is deeper. Deeper does not always mean longer. Deeper means truer. Truer to how God meets you here. Truer to how your body hears safety. Truer to how love actually grows in a home. Not through constant acceleration, but through a cadence that people can breathe with. In this cadence, you find yourself less reactive and more responsive, less brittle and more durable, less scattered and more whole. At the end of this chapter, the ache is not erased, but it is held differently. The home has not changed its floor plan, but it has remembered its soul. The nervous system has not forgotten how to brace, but it has tasted how to soften. And in that softening, a door opens toward prayer that is not a chore and not a performance. Prayer becomes the way a house listens to God. Prayer becomes the way a heart lets itself be guarded. Joseph's silence is an invitation to listen to the heart of God. And in that listening, the hurry that once stole your peace begins to lose its power, not by force, but by the gentle solidity of a presence that refuses to leave. There is a kind of strength that does not raise its voice. A mantle you can almost feel resting on the thresholds and hallways, steadying the air before the day begins to move. Spiritual authority in the home is like that. Not a loud command, not a rigid posture, but a presence that gathers the rooms under care. It feels like standing in a doorway and realizing the doorway is standing with you. It feels like the house knows it is not unguarded. The body registers this before the mind gives it language. Breath deepens, the chest opens, the jaw releases, and the nervous system shifts from bracing to being held. Authority arrives as belonging. Belonging arrives as peace. In many families, this authority looks like a simple blessing that rises with the first light, not as a performance, but as a natural breath the house takes each morning. It may be the father or the mother who carries it. It may be the one who keeps the keys and keeps the calendar. Sometimes it is the eldest who learned tenderness early, or the youngest whose faith is uncomplicated and bright. Whoever holds it, the gesture is the same, a heart turned Godward on behalf of everyone under the roof. Nothing dramatic happens in the room, yet something decisive changes inside the people who live there, as if the walls themselves remember why they stand together. Sacramentals often accompany this tenderness without turning it into theater, a small font near the entrance that catches the light like a quiet star, the cool touch of holy water on the forehead, the chest, the shoulders, a trace that tells the body it has been claimed by mercy. The slow, careful sign of the cross, drawn not to prove piety, but to mark a belonging that cannot be revoked. Neuroscience has a way of confirming what faith already knows. The body trusts what it can sense. and ritual movement teaches safety more quickly than argument. Shoulders descend, breathing becomes less shallow, a rhythm that was scattered begins to collect itself around meaning. When the intercession of St. Joseph is invited, sometimes aloud, sometimes with a glance toward an image, what enters the home is not noise, but shelter. The old title feels startlingly fresh. Terror of demons, not because drama is needed, but because love deserves a guardian who will not yield at the first sign of storm. He who worked with wood learned how to read the grain of fear and the knots of confusion. He steadied them with patience and skill. In homes that remember his protection, nights of anxious wakefulness begin to lose their bite, and mornings arrive with a courage that is gentle rather than brittle. The spirit of the house stands taller, the way a person stands taller when a trusted companion steps beside them. Some households place the Holy Family where life actually happens, near the table that gathers stories, near the shelf where keys land at dusk, near the quiet corner that knows both prayer and silence. Enthronement is a word that may sound grand, but in a home, it often looks like giving the center of the day back to the one who holds all centers. A small icon, a carved image, a simple print. The form is less important than the fidelity it represents. The eyes find that image again and again, and each glance works on the heart like warm water over cold hands, slowly restoring sensation. A different story starts to shape the rooms. This is a little Nazareth, and the ordinary is allowed to glow. There are homes where genuine conflicts and long sorrows live. Spiritual authority does not pretend otherwise. It looks at grief the way a craftsman looks at a cracked beam, not with panic, not with denial, but with a steady appraisal and the willingness to do the careful work love requires. The blessing spoken over such rooms does not erase the crack. It keeps the structure from forgetting its strength. It tells the nervous system that even here, even now, a presence greater than fear is responsible for the foundation. Shame has no assignment in that atmosphere. Blame has no assignment. Only fidelity, only a sheltering attention that returns day after day and holds the line where it matters most. There is a quiet power in naming the home not just as private space, but as vocation, a place of becoming, a place where souls are apprenticed in patience, forgiveness, joy, and steadfastness. The pattern is familiar in holy stories because it is true. God loves to enter history through houses, through kitchens that smell like bread, through workshops where hands learn to serve, through doorways that open and close with hospitality. In the school of St. Joseph, we learn to trust in divine providence. Trust looks like a willingness to let the ordinary be enough soil for miracles we may never see with our eyes, yet feel in the way the day holds together. Sometimes the person who blesses the home feels the least qualified to do it. A memory of failure sits near the heart, a fear of hypocrisy at the edge of the tongue. Yet spiritual authority in a family is not a reward for perfection. It is a responsibility accepted in humility. It speaks softly and lives consistently. It does not control. It cultivates. It does not perform. It protects, and because it protects, others relax into their truer selves. Children laugh with fewer spikes of anxiety. Spouses apologize with fewer defenses. Even solitude becomes less sharp and more spacious because the air is full of welcome rather than verdicts. The body keeps score of this atmosphere. Over time, the cortisol surges that used to greet the morning begin to ease, and the vagal tone that supports calm connection grows stronger. This is not theory for the mind only. It is texture for the heart and skin. A home that receives a daily blessing gradually teaches the people who live there to expect safety at the level of breath and bones. The expectation itself becomes a shield during harder days, like a well-built lintel that does not collapse under sudden weather. Beneath all of this, the simplest truth keeps repeating like a kindly refrain. Presence changes rooms. The presence of God, quiet and near. The presence of St. Joseph, watchful and kind. The presence of a parent, a friend, or a single soul who says yes to guarding the space where love grows. With St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer, and within that prayer, the house stands not as a place to escape from or to conquer, but as a sanctuary where people learn, slowly and surely, how to belong to God and to one another without fear. The idea of a perfect morning often collapses under its own weight, and this is why most people fail at morning prayer quietly reveals its truth. Failure usually doesn't come from a lack of love for God. It comes from an overload of expectations that the body cannot carry at sunrise. A mind that wants a flawless half hour meets a nervous system that is still shaking off the night, and the mismatch creates friction. Plans stretch bigger than energy. Guilt steps in where gentleness should have stood. The heart then begins to associate prayer with pressure, and what should have been a shelter begins to feel like a test. There is a counterintuitive path that holds. Simple consistency beats sporadic intensity. The brain learns through repetition, not occasional extremes, and the soul warms to the same rhythm. What is repeated with tenderness slowly becomes the way the day is made. The basal ganglia adopt the cadence. The prefrontal strain eases. Decisions cost less. Attention spends itself more wisely. Tiny faithfulness has a way of outlasting grand gestures, and the morning discovers its own humility, steady, breathable, real. Joseph's obedient silence teaches that offered work equals prayer. In his world, wood did not need to choose between being wood and being holy. It became holy by being shaped with love. The mornings of a house follow that wisdom. Breakfast becomes a liturgy of nourishment. Commuting becomes a corridor of intention. Tidying becomes a small act of mercy toward the people who will walk that floor later. Nothing noisy, nothing theatrical, just the decision to let love have form. With St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer. The day begins before the schedule. It begins in the heart. Many fail not for lack of effort, but because the nervous system was never brought along. A heart that sprints at dawn ends up associating prayer with breathlessness, and breathlessness rarely lingers. Neuroscience names the pattern. High arousal narrows attention, narrows curiosity, narrows the capacity to receive. When prayer is yoked to a clenched body, it inherits the body's rush. When prayer is yoked to a calm body, it inherits the body's openness. The difference is not about trying harder. It is about entering gently enough that the interior door does not slam from the draft. There is a mercy in 3-5 faithful minutes transform more than 30 irregular ones. It respects limits without shrinking love. It respects the season one is actually living. New parent, caretaker, grief bearer, shift worker, and refuses to pretend. Those minutes are not placeholders or compromises. They are seeds. Seeds do not apologize for being small. They rejoice in being alive. Over days and weeks, the nervous system learns to expect this pocket of peace. The vagus nerve strengthens its signal, and the whole person becomes more available to grace without theatrics. The transformation is gentle enough to go unnoticed until, one afternoon, the home feels different and no one can quite explain why. Another reason many falter is the hidden bargain that tries to trade prayer for control. If I pray well, today will behave. When reality refuses the bargain, disappointment curdles into cynicism. Joseph's way allows no such transaction. It offers presence without demand. In that presence, prayer no longer tries to manipulate the day. Prayer steadies the person who will live it. The schedule may wobble, but the center holds. The tasks may multiply, but the soul remains unfragmented. The dignity of an ordinary morning returns, not because circumstances obey, but because the heart has learned where it stands. Some carry a story that says only long, eloquent, uninterrupted devotions count, and anything less is a failure worth hiding. That story needs a kinder ending. A father of the church would call it scruple, a therapist might call it perfectionism, and the carpenter of Nazareth would simply call it unnecessary. The kingdom has always been built with loaves and fishes, with mustard seeds and widow's mites, with the littleness that keeps choosing yes. Littleness is not a flaw, it is a doorway. Through it, large rooms become intimate again, and prayer becomes possible in the life one is truly living. The body keeps a scorecard of mornings, and it graciously revises that score when experience changes. When the first minutes of the day are consistently linked with safety, meaning, and a felt sense of nearness, the amygdala relaxes its patrol, and the hippocampus files a new memory. This space is safe. This ritual helps. Over time, the system learns to downshift more quickly, and access to gratitude, patience, and empathy widens. Emotional regulation stops being a heroic feat and becomes an atmosphere. In that atmosphere, even interruptions feel less like assaults and more like tides that can be navigated without capsizing. Why most people fail at morning prayer looks different when the lens changes. It is not moral weakness that derails hearts. It is often the absence of a rhythm the body can believe. The remedy is not harder vows, but truer belonging. Belonging to a God who meets people where they are. Belonging to a home that is consecrated in its ordinary traffic. Belonging to a tradition in which small fidelity is honored by heaven. In the school of St. Joseph, we learn to trust in divine providence. And trust has a sound. It sounds like footsteps that are no longer rushing. It sounds like rooms that receive their people without judgment. It sounds like a day that begins before the schedule, because it begins in the heart. There are mornings when the heart finds its way before the calendar does, and the home feels as if it inhales with you. The rite that follows is simple enough to live inside any season and deep enough to hold a lifetime, not a performance, but a path. It begins with a first minute that belongs wholly to quiet, the kind of quiet that lets the shoulders descend and the breath lengthen without strain. As the exhale grows a little longer than the inhale, the body receives a message of safety that words rarely manage to deliver, and the mind, no longer conscripted by alarms, begins to sense a presence that was here before the lights came on. Joseph's silence is an invitation to listen to the heart of God, and in that listening, the nervous system shifts from bracing to belonging. In many homes, a small gesture then gathers the whole day into one sign. It looks like a slow tracing across forehead, chest, and shoulders, the familiar movement that marks a life as spoken for by mercy. No rush, no proof to offer, only a belonging remembered. Sometimes a short invocation rises almost by itself, a line that has guarded families for centuries and still sounds new. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. The atmosphere changes in ways that the skin can feel, like air after a summer storm. What was tight becomes spacious. What was scattered begins to collect. Emotional neuroscience would call it a downshift in arousal. The tradition calls it grace finding room. From that space, a single sentence of scripture often surfaces with surprising clarity. Not many words, just one line. A verse from Luke 2 that knows the rhythms of a house where God learned the cadence of human days. One line carried gently has a way of becoming timber rather than decoration, a beam rather than a plaque. The mind chews it slowly. The heart lets it rest. The rooms seem to arrange themselves around its weight. Meaning settles where hurry once lived. Curiosity returns. The day feels less like a corridor to sprint through and more like a dwelling to inhabit with care. An offering then takes shape, not as a bargain, but as a handing over. Faces come to mind, the ones under this roof, the ones far away, the ones loved and the ones hard to carry. Tasks appear in their quiet order. Some light, some heavy, none of them alone anymore. Even the hidden crosses that would rather not be seen step into the light without spectacle. With St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer. Indeed, in that line a dignity unfolds for the most ordinary movements. Breakfast gains a sacramental tenderness, commutes turn into pilgrim paths. Emails become small opportunities for honesty and blessing. The soul does not promise heroics. The soul chooses fidelity, and fidelity proves stronger than the noise of the hour. The threshold holds a final tenderness that many homes have learned to cherish. Sometimes it is the doorway itself that receives a simple sign, as if the wood remembers another carpenter's hands. Sometimes a drop of holy water cools a warm forehead, or touches a lintel, and the air carries that clean, faint scent that the heart associates with sanctuary. The brain, tracking these sensations, files a new pattern. This house is guarded. This day begins inside a blessing. Anxiety loses its script. Even if weather gathers later, the foundation does not forget what it has received. In the school of St. Joseph, we learn to trust in divine providence, and providence is not an idea here. It is a way the rooms stand. Across the week, the rhythm widens without strain. Some households let a short litany rise on a chosen day, the names and titles of the guardians spoken like stepping stones across a stream. Another day invites a gentle evening recollection, a simple glance back that is more gratitude than audit, more love than ledger. Nothing heavy, nothing theatrical, just a cadence sturdy enough for fragile hearts. Over time, the body comes to expect this softness at the edges of morning and night, and the soul discovers that humility travels farther than intensity, that consistency heals more deeply than ambition. What emerges is a home that does not need to shout its faith to keep its faith. The rite is lean and luminous, a handful of gestures and words that could fit into the narrowest dawn, yet somehow enlarge the day. People breathe easier without knowing why. Conversations acquire more room for kindness. Responsibilities remain, but they stop behaving like tyrants. The house remembers its vocation to be a little Nazareth, and those who dwell within it remember that holiness has always been agile enough to live among dishes and deadlines. Presence has become the architecture. Peace has learned the floor plan. And morning, once a gauntlet, becomes again the hour when God is felt in the wood and the water, in the verse and the breath, in the quiet strength of the one who keeps watch. The first light touches the edges of the room, the way a craftsman runs a hand across raw lumber, feeling for knots and hidden splinters, learning the wood before shaping it. Dawn is a workshop, and the soul arrives like a workbench, waiting to receive the day's materials. Nothing in this workshop is wasted, not the quiet that lingers after sleep, not the ache that reminds where the heart is tender, not the hope that rises without making a sound. In this space, St. Joseph stands like a steady foreman, present without hurry, attentive without noise, teaching by the way presence itself holds a house together. Joseph's silence is an invitation to listen to the heart of God, and that listening becomes the atmosphere where work turns into prayer and rooms begin to breathe. On the bench lies a carpenter's square, its cool right angle catching the light. The square is the word, truing what wobbles inside, aligning edges the night left skewed, restoring a plumb line to thoughts that drifted toward fear. Under its measure, comparisons loosen, jealousies unclench, and the mind remembers that truth is not a cage but a straight path. The nervous system recognizes this alignment as safety. The body lengthens into it. In a home, this feels like conversations that land gentler, like decisions that no longer lean on panic, like time that regains its dignity because it has a center again. In the school of St. Joseph, alignment is not a scold. It is a mercy that keeps beams from bowing under unkind weight. Beside the square rests a small stack of sandpaper, humble and steady in its purpose. Repentance is like that, quiet abrasion that removes what does not belong, not to shame the wood, but to let its grain show. There is nothing theatrical here, only the soft, persistent truth that roughness yields to patient hands. The past offers its snags and regrets, and grace answers with passes that are firm and kind. Neuroscience would say the grooves of reactivity begin to soften with each gentle stroke. Tradition would say the heart learns contrition without collapse. Over time, the surface no longer snags at every touch. It welcomes contact. It welcomes relationship. It welcomes the day. The hammer waits with a weight that is comforting rather than harsh. Decision has that feel when it rests in trust. Struck against stubborn places, it does not punish, it sets things. A yes is driven where it belongs, not because the will is grand, but because fidelity loves to be fastened. The sound is familiar in houses that have learned to hold together, a measured rhythm that says good has been chosen and will not be easily shaken free. With St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer, and each decision becomes a sacrament of steadiness, a way the invisible takes on form. Even when weather changes, the pattern holds, because something has been fixed in place with care. Nails lie in a shallow tin, unassuming and utterly essential. Habits look like this: small, repeatable, often overlooked, and stronger than they appear. A single nail does not carry a wall. Many nails together make the wall a promise. So it is with the gestures that shape a morning, the brief verse carried like a beam, the quiet belonging remembered at the doorway, the offering that returns without drama. Procedural memory learns this liturgy of smallness, and soon the body reaches for it the way a hand reaches for tools in the dark without fumbling. The extraordinary becomes sustainable because the ordinary has been honored. The grain itself tells a story. No two boards the same, each with lines that wander and knots that interrupt. Temperament, history, sorrow, and gift turn up in the fibers of a soul exactly like that. St. Joseph's craft did not erase the grain. It learned to read it. Where the wood curled, he planned with its curve. Where a knot refused to lie, he learned the patience it demanded. Holiness in a home resembles this wisdom. People are not made interchangeable. The little Nazareth of a family holds a mother's quiet and a father's watch, a child's wild laughter and another's more private gentleness, a friend's steady presence and a grandparent's remembered blessing. Under providence, the differences stop fighting and begin to fit. Under tenderness, the joints learn to meet without strain. Joints carry the secret strength of a structure. Mortise and tenon, hidden from the eye, bear the weight that surfaces cannot hold alone. In a household, hidden graces do that work. Secret forgiveness, unadvertised patience, the small mercy no one will ever know was offered. These are the joinery of love. They do not make noise, yet they keep the frame from twisting when life applies pressure. Emotional resilience grows in the same hidden places. Vagal tone deepens. Reactivity loses its authority. What looks simple from the outside holds together because something faithful is happening where the eye does not linger. Sometimes a plane skims the surface, the soft rasp of its blade releasing curls of excess that fall like feathers to the floor. Discernment moves like that through an early hour. Not every thought needs to stay. Not every fear needs to be carved into the design. Not every urgency deserves the dignity of being structural. The shavings collect in a small drift, and what remains is cleaner and truer, the original intention of the wood more visible and more itself. There is relief in this, a breathing room that arrives without fanfare. The soul that once felt crowded finds space enough to welcome the day without losing its shape. At the edge of the bench, a pot of glue waits, patient and sticky with promise. Covenant has that character, bond that sets slowly, bond that sets surely. A family, a friendship, a solitary vocation under a roof becomes stable not only by the striking of nails, but by the quiet adhesions of shared rhythms, shared meals, shared prayer. The bond is not brittle. It flexes with seasons and returns to itself after strain. In that returning, people learn to trust that they will not be dropped when they are most tired. The house, over time, receives this trust into its very timbers, and even silence tastes different, less like absence, more like shelter. The workshop closes its circle as light grows stronger, and the finished piece is not a showpiece, but a table with room for bread, a chair that holds a body without complaint, a doorway steady enough to be passed through 1,000 times without wobble. Mourning has become carpentry, a home has become vocation, prayer has become the way presence takes shape in wood and water, verse and breath, habit and hope. In the school of St. Joseph, we learn to trust in divine providence, and providence answers by making peace structural rather than decorative. Which piece of your heart needs aligning today so your home can breathe peace? By now, the light has settled into the rooms, the way peace settles into a listening heart, quiet but persuasive, tender but strong. The arc of this morning stands visible, hurry loosening its grip, presence taking its place, the house remembering its own vocation. What once felt like a corridor of alarms begins to feel like a chapel with doors and windows, and the body, so often the first to brace, becomes the first to know that shelter has returned. Breath finds an even cadence. Thought finds a straighter line. The soul finds that it is not walking the day alone. The story that the nervous system tells has shifted. Earlier patterns of pressure were rehearsed without malice, only habit. Now another rehearsal begins, one that links dawn not with judgment, but with welcome. Emotional memory starts to store a different soundtrack, fewer edges, more room, fewer verdicts, more mercy. The muscles behind the eyes unclench, and attention once captive to threat widens enough to notice goodness again. The soft clink of a mug, the low hum of appliances, a shaft of light on a familiar wall. Nothing spectacular, everything essential. The extraordinary arrives disguised as normal life, finally allowed to breathe. The faces of those who share these walls begin to appear not as tasks to manage, but as mysteries to receive. The parent's weariness looks less like inadequacy and more like love poured out. The child's neediness reads less like interruption and more like a chance to practice patience that will not break. The solitude of one who lives alone shifts from echo to presence, a space where companionship becomes tangible in the quiet. The household, in all its forms, looks back at its people with a kind expression. Under this gaze, shame loses its vocabulary, blame loses its appetite. Fidelity keeps its place at the table and does not raise its voice. The phrases that anchored the morning return with a new resonance. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. Yours carries the weight of a hand on a doorway that will hold through weather. With St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer, sounds less like a motto and more like a lived rhythm that flows through dishes and deadlines. In the school of St. Joseph, we learn to trust in divine providence. Feels less like an idea and more like architecture, the way beams hold a roof without fanfare or fatigue. Trust becomes structural rather than decorative, something the whole house can lean on without apology. The carpentry hidden inside these hours shows its design. Alignment became mercy, not measurement. Repentance became softness, not humiliation. Decision became steadiness, not strain. Habit became hospitality, not compulsion. Joinery formed where no one was looking. Small forgiveness that refused to keep score. Patience that outlasted the moment's heat. Tenderness that came without an audience. What began as a rite has turned into a way of being at home, and the heart, once divided, begins to act like a single room with many windows, a place where light can cross from one corner to another without obstruction. Even the mind's questions sound different inside this gentler air. What will the day bring no longer lands as a threat. It arrives as a canvas that does not need to be perfect to be beautiful. Plans still matter, limits still apply, unplanned weather will still pass through. Yet the center holds. The core practices remain light enough to carry and strong enough to shelter. The body remembers how to return, and the soul discovers that returning is what holiness feels like when it grows inside ordinary time. A line rises for the road, not to command, but to companion. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. Another line follows it. True in kitchens as on altars. With St. Joseph, every work becomes a prayer. Between them stands a promise that does not depend on moods or outcomes. Providence is not remote from this address. Providence knows the floor plan by heart. The threshold does not need to tremble. The rooms do not need to pretend. The people do not need to earn what has already been given. A question remains, generous and searching, the kind that opens rather than accuses. Which piece of the heart is ready to align so the home can breathe peace? The answer does not need to be loud. It can be as simple as a softer tone at breakfast, a calmer breath before a conversation, a glance toward the image that reminds who keeps watch. Little choices become timber. Timber becomes structure. Structure learns how to sing without sound. As the day begins to move, the presence at the doorway remains, quiet, reliable, unafraid. Joseph does not hurry the house. He guards it. His silence says more than speeches could say. It says there is time enough to love well. It says there is grace enough for what this day will hold. It says the one who made a home in Nazareth has made a home here. And with that assurance, the morning keeps its shape, the rooms keep their peace, and the heart crosses the threshold carrying what it received, a steadiness strong enough for weather and a tenderness brave enough for love. Even as the day gathers its pace beyond the windows, a quiet word rises that does not compete with noise and does not depend on mood. It begins like breath and widens like light. Father of mercies, you who made a dwelling in Nazareth and taught love to speak softly, receive this home as you receive that humble workshop and kitchen, and let the air remember your kindness. The room seems to lean in, the way a listener leans toward a trusted voice, and the heart, no longer arguing with itself, finds language for what it most longs to offer. Lord Jesus, Son who learned our steps across a simple floor, enter these rooms as you once entered the small spaces of your own home. Sit with the fatigue that lingers in chairs. Stand with the questions that collect near doors. Walk the hallways where memories hang like pictures, some bright, some hard to face, and let each one be held in a light that does not shame. A different courage takes shape. Not brittle, not theatrical, the kind that allows love to be steady when circumstances refuse to be simple. Holy Mary, Mother whose gaze steadied a child and steadied a man, teach these eyes the art of gentleness. Where impatience has learned to arrive first, let kindness learn to arrive sooner. Where fear has learned to speak loudly, let trust learn the grammar of quiet. Wrap this table in a patience that outlasts arguments and a joy that does not need perfect conditions to be real. The walls answer with their own kind of silence, as if the very paint remembers laughter and the way forgiveness sounds when it returns without fanfare. St. Joseph, silent guardian and terror of demons, keep watch at the thresholds no one sees, at the edges of a tone before it sharpens, at the edge of a thought before it hardens into judgment, at the edge of a decision before it forgets love. Stand beside the beds where sleep sometimes hesitates, and lend the night the calm of your presence. Stand beside the sink where service repeats itself without applause, and lend the ordinary the dignity of prayer. With you, every work becomes a prayer, and under your care the hidden becomes holy. God of providence, you who keep time without hurry and hold the future without strain, let this day learn your cadence. When interruptions arrive unannounced, let peace be quicker than irritation. When tasks outnumber hours, let wisdom choose what truly matters. When grief or worry shows its face, let tenderness meet it first, the way morning light meets a room without asking it to be tidy. The nervous system eases, not because life has promised to behave, but because the center has remembered where it rests. Bless, O Lord, the ones who share these walls and the ones whose names live here, even when their bodies do not. Bless the elder with fragile steps and the child with loud laughter, the friend who drops by and the neighbor carried in prayer, the weary whose courage is quiet and the hopeful whose joy is contagious. Bless the one who rises first and the one who sleeps last, the one who cooks and the one who cleans, the one who mends and the one who pays, the one who waits and the one who returns. The list is not a ledger. It is a litany of belonging, and belonging becomes the strongest thing in the room. Guard the thresholds of this home, Lord, doors that open outward with hospitality and close inward with safety. Guard the windows that welcome light, and the corners that hold secrets, the appliances that hum faithfully, and the cupboards that keep simple abundance. Guard the words that travel these rooms, that they may carry truth without cruelty and conviction, without contempt. Guard the silences, too, that they may not be punishments, but spaces where love breathes and souls reset. The prayer moves like a carpenter's hand, finding what carries weight and making it sound. In the school of St. Joseph, teach a trust that does not need guarantees to begin. Teach a steadiness that does not demand applause to endure. Teach a joy that does not deny sorrow, yet refuses to be swallowed by it. Let the scriptures that cross this threshold in the morning settle into bone, and let the memory of blessing touch the day the way sunlight touches a floor, quietly, completely, without asking permission. The promises remain gentle because gentleness is what makes them strong. Receive, O God, the smallness that this house can offer without pretending to be large, 5 minutes that matter more than an hour that never arrives, one kind word that rescues an afternoon, one honest apology that writes a listing table, one shared glance toward the Holy Family that reminds everyone why they stay. No bargaining enters, only the steady exchange of love for love, littleness for largeness, time for meaning. And when night returns, let the rooms remember that nothing given in trust is lost. Let the beds hold bodies that are finally willing to rest. Let the doors stand guarded without strain. Let the air keep the trace of prayer, the way wood keeps the warmth of hand. Joseph's silence remains as invitation. Mary's gaze remains as comfort. Christ's presence remains as home. Nadine, the heart hears the last words settle and knows, with a knowledge beyond argument, that Providence has entered the day by the front door. Which piece of the heart is ready to align so the home can breathe peace?